You're in the 06010.
Hello and welcome into Fantasy Focus
Heyo.
Football. Today is Monday, August 21st. My name is Daniel Dopp, joined by Field Yates. Today's show is presented by Geico. Switch to Geico, see all the ways that you could save. Field Yates, it's good to see your face, man, after a long weekend. How was your weekend?
Long. Let me be very clear. Usually weekends feel like they're way too short. This weekend felt like it was way too long, and here's why, Daniel.
Yeah.
I may, in some people's eyes, look like a young man. I am an old fogey now, and I think that officially happened 19 months ago today when I became a dad for the first time.
Yeah.
And we decided quickly in our family, like, what's better than one kid is two kids, because you know what is so overrated? Sleep.
Yeah.
All right. So a while back, my lovely wife, Chapin, hits me up and is like, hey, there are 3 concerts I want to see this summer.
Yep.
Thinking to myself, that's reasonable enough, right? 3 concerts. Like that. I like concerts in general. I like concerts in the summer as well.
Yeah.
So 3 concerts. And upon further inspection, I realized those 3 concerts were in back-to-back nights.
Yes.
This past weekend, I went to 3 concerts in 3 nights, Daniel Dopp.
That's a lot.
I am burnt out.
That's not even a thing that I do on most weekends.
If I fall asleep during the show, that is the reason why.
That's why.
But shout out to all the 06 owners that I saw. I saw a ton of people at Fenway Park Friday and Saturday night for back-to-back concerts. Huge podcast fans up there. It was great to see. I loved answering random questions. Like someone would spot you from 7 rows away, or like when you're walking to get into the stadium, they're already in the line and you're walking to the back of the line and they'll just randomly shout out. Like I had a lot of Bijan Robinson questions this weekend because why not?
Right?
And my wife, and we were with a couples friends, and my wife, and this was one of her bridesmaids, who, when the question was asked, like, is Bijan the pick?
Yeah.
I swear this woman thought that someone was speaking a foreign language to her. She was like, what are
we doing here?
Is that Italian? Like,
right.
Is that, what language was just spoken to you? Because Bijan meant nothing to her, but it meant a lot to that person in the line. So shout out to everybody who was asking the questions this weekend. And again, if I fall asleep during the show, or if anybody has coffee to send my way, let me know. I'm so ready for it.
So Rosie and I were sitting on the couch this weekend.
Okay.
We were watching.
Sounds like going to 3 concerts.
It was pretty great.
The exact opposite.
We were watching Inside the Den, episode 4, Inside the Den. The Lions put out a new episode every couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And as we're catching up on all the behind the scenes from the Lions, I'm scrolling through my Instagram feed. And then all of a sudden, I see Field Yates standing there at a concert with Dan Orlovsky.
Yeah. Dano was there.
And I was like, you know what? Now I get how Field feels when Mike and I talk about going to bowling without him.
Yeah, there you go.
It hurt.
Wow.
Finally, I was like, man, Field, this is my thing. And you went to concerts with Dan Orlovsky. The wrong Dan. It wasn't even the right one.
Dang, I'm sorry about that. Yeah,
So,
great time with Dano, who's
dude,
the man.
It looked like it was so much fun, though. Honestly, like, other than the fact that you did not sleep the entire weekend, have you ever done 3 concerts back to back to back?
No,
Like, this is what Fish fans do for a living.
I was going to say, like, I never went to Coachella, but I felt like I went to Coachella this weekend.
Oh,
Is that
I
right?
love it.
Coachella, that's still a thing, right?
I don't know if it's still a thing, but it was for a while. It lives in our hearts.
Every year I get, my group of friends, like, are we doing Coachella this year? And every single time I was not available for one reason or another.
Yeah.
But I feel like I've got some FOMO. I've got
That's
some
so
FOMO
good.
for those that have done long weekends, whether it's Coachella or one of those week-long shows. I miss those days.
Yeah, me too. Field, we got a bunch we're going to talk about on today's show.
Okay, yeah,
got a
big
little
show,
bit of news
huge
that we are
show,
going to
yeah.
get into
Yeah.
off the top, and then we're going to talk about sleepers, breakouts, and busts, one of the shows that everybody's always asking about.
Yep.
We're going to talk about what those terms specifically mean. But before we get into any of that,
Yeah.
Field Yates, quick bit of news.
Yeah, a little bit of news. This one comes via the Las Vegas Review Journal, and the headline is that it sounds like Josh Jacobs will end his holdout and report to the team prior to Week 1.
I'm nervous
they
about
play the
that.
Broncos in Week 1. Why? Tell me why.
I'm nervous about the fact that it says expected to.
Yeah, I mean, I think you always want to stop short of guaranteeing something because a player could certainly change his mind, and that has happened many times before.
I just want it to be sooner rather than later, in part because, like, I want that return to play to be like, you got to get ramped back up, right?
Yeah.
Like, the sooner you're on the field, the sooner that we feel like you're going to be the player that you were last year.
Yeah.
Nobody touched the ball more than Josh Jacobs did last year.
Yeah, so there are some red flags still here, right? As you said, like it's not like he has shown up already. He's not there on the Raiders practice field today. Moreover, if he does show up the week of the first game, are we certain that Josh Jacobs is going to play in that first game? Like, is there a football conditioning aspect here?
Yeah.
And so it's, I'd mentioned early in the season, like how I thought Josh Jacobs would show up right before the start of the regular season. And I had said, like, my concerns were fairly minimal, but this does sort of like there are still some things that I want to keep an eye on here specifically, not just the conditioning part of it, but
Sure.
this is something we've discussed previously as well, is like if he does return, and what you are concerned about if you're drafting Josh Jacobs is mostly that, like, if something happens, if a tweak takes place, is that tweak going to cost him a month, or is it going to cost him a week? Like Josh Jacobs, as we know, he's a tough dude. Yeah. Remember he broke his shoulder as a rookie and was like, I think he wanted to keep playing through it.
Yeah.
Right. So like, and I'm not blaming him in this regard. It's different when you are a rookie who's got 3+ years left on your contract as opposed to a guy in a contract year after a very difficult summer, not getting that contract that you wanted, the long-term deal. Like, you have to look out for your best interest. So that is where I think the conversation drifts to, is how much risk is there involved drafting Josh Jacobs, even if we do expect him to return the week of the season opener. So I have moved him and Jonathan Taylor down to like the back end of my second tier of running backs, like RB8, RB9. I think truly, if you're the kind of person that wants to like avoid risk, Tony Pollard, Nick Chubb, players of that caliber, move ahead of the Josh Jacobs of the world. If you are okay with the risk, you might end up getting a tremendous value, because if Josh Jacobs is anything close to what he was last year and he goes as RB9, as like pick 19 off the board, you might win your league because you got Josh Jacobs at the back end of round 2.
Yeah, it's a little bit of game of chicken right now in fantasy drafts, because if you decide to go that route and things work out, like you said, that value you're getting is just astronomically huge. Either one of those running backs. And like I'm doing best ball drafts, they're easily falling to the 3rd, potentially 4th round sometimes, which is crazy. Everyone's just afraid to be able to go that route. But I don't know. I like seeing that he's expected to be back with the team. We wanted to hear that. The NFL is always just more fun when you have superstars playing with the team.
Yeah, it does not eliminate. It's a sign that he is unlikely to report at like week 6. Now, Adam Schefter has told us this many times. Josh Jacobs is going to make $588,000 for every game that he is on the team's roster. Right now, he is not on the roster because he has not signed his franchise tag tender.
Correct.
If you're a guy who wants a whole bunch of money, are you going to skip out on $588,000 per week?
I wouldn't.
Most likely the answer is no. So this is probably expected for Josh Jacobs, but a conversation that we'll continue to have, and I think we're going to do another mock draft show at some point before the regular season. But the value you're getting in Josh Jacobs is hard to miss. I mean, he led the NFL with 1,653 rushing yards last season. He had 41 rushing attempts of at least 10 yards. He is a star player. There's no two ways about that.
All right, let's move ahead and talk sleepers, breakouts, and busts. Field Yates. As a part of this premise, I want to ask you, we're going to give some sleepers at every position. When we say the term sleeper, what does that mean to Field Yates?
So I think there was a time, and I remember this like early in my fantasy football career, and maybe even prior to that, where the term sleeper to me meant the name that people hadn't heard of before, that you could get in your fantasy draft, and that player could really impact your roster. I think with the advent of social media and just the NFL's rising popularity, and frankly, the growing popularity of fantasy football, it's pretty hard for me to meet a fantasy football fan who's like, let me get your sleepers for this season. And for me to throw a name at them, they're like, I have literally never heard of that person before.
That happened to me one time this offseason.
One time. Okay. Do you remember who the player was?
Deneric Prince.
Okay. So Deneric Prince. That is pretty sleeperish right there.
Yeah. Because everyone else we've sort of heard, we've talked about in our circles. That's all we do is talk fantasy football all summer long.
And it's such a popular thing. So it's no longer the player that you have literally never heard of. It generally is the player whose ADP just feels way too low to me, or a player who has the right skill set or opportunity that he could have a legitimate impact this season. Baked into the idea of being a sleeper is that the floor is really low.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not telling you that you can innately trust this player. I am just telling you that if a few things go right, you could hit and you could win big. And think about all the sleepers over the years that have been the stars of fantasy football, right? I mean, like Ramondre Stevenson last year. What kind of buzz was he generating during the preseason? A little bit, but not a whole lot, right? Not the top. I think he was RB6 or something last year. So I can't guarantee you that we're going to have one of those every season, but we're going to do our best to give you some names that I think are at least worth keeping an eye on as we go through the remaining 2 or 3 weeks of drafts.
All right, so let's start at the quarterback position. Desmond Ridder only had 4 starts last year, Field Yates, but I think exactly what you said, and I love this call on Desmond Ridder. I'm totally with you.
Really?
He has 2 things. When I'm thinking about exactly what you said about a sleeper, he's got 2 things. I think he's got a situation.
Okay.
He's surrounded by really good skill position players, and Kyle Pitts and Drake London and Bijan Robinson, and his ability to potentially use his legs. Those are the two things I think give him sleeper value here. But why do you like Desmond Ridder?
So first of all, at the quarterback spot, pretty much every name is so well known, right? Yeah. We've talked about every quarterback in depth, not just on this podcast, but everywhere, right? Quarterbacks move the needle.
Yep.
So Desmond Ridder probably has been under-discussed on this show, and I'm actually less motivated by the players around him and more motivated by the fact that he's an awesome runner. Going back to college, and I get that that's 2 seasons ago, but during his 4 years at Cincinnati, he had 501 rushing attempts, did Ridder. He is a very, very capable athlete. Not elite like Justin Fields, but very capable athlete. And there were 5 quarterbacks last season who had at least 100 rushing attempts. Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Justin Fields, and Daniel Jones. All of those players were top 10 fantasy quarterbacks on a per-game basis.
Yeah.
As we know, the Falcons, despite the additions of Kyle Pitts and Drake London over the past 2 drafts, are perhaps the most run-inclined team in the entire NFL. If Ridder gets the rush work that Marcus Mariota got last season, and it's just like a 20% better passer, think about what Marcus Mariota was last season when he was kind of like right on the fringe of a startable quarterback in deep leagues. Ridder, I think, is about as capable as a runner.
It should be doable.
And if you get a better passing outlook from him, even if it's not I don't expect him to throw the ball 35 times a game, right? But if you just get competent quarterback play through the air for Desmond Ridder, then yeah, he could break out this season.
I'm pretty sure you would throw 20% better than what Marcus Mariota did last year.
It's possible. It is very possible, Daniel. It was an ugly, ugly watch last year. So obviously still not like super, super optimistic on Ridder because there are so many good options. I've got him like quarterback 23, but still a name to know that like if you look at the guys who are ranked somewhere between like 19 and 27, I think he's the best athlete or one of the best athletes amongst those quarterbacks, and rushing ability is the clearest path for a quarterback to take off.
I'm with you. If there was a quarterback deep into the season, you were saying, boy, I need a bye week fill-in at the QB position.
Yep.
It's very possible that Desmond Ridder could be someone like that in one of those leagues. All right, let's talk about running backs here, Field. You got a couple of late names on this one. Obviously, we're talking sleepers. You got Ty Chandler and Rashawn Johnson. Obviously, these guys.
One more, actually. Evan Hall.
You got another one.
Evan Hall. So,
all right.
I'm sorry. I'll throw it in there, but I'll try to be quick on these. I'll lump Evan Hall in there just because I think these guys all fit into the same category.
They feel like insurance backs to me.
Well, so I think it's hard to find a sleeper at running back because we are constantly espousing the virtues of a really good one, right? So everybody knows all the really talented running backs. What these 3 guys have in common is that I don't know that the current starting running back on this team's roster is a guaranteed lock to hold that job for the entire season.
Wow.
Quickly, let me go through it, right? So Ty Chandler backs up Alexander Madison. While I have Madison as a top 20 play, have we talked about this? Are we sure that Madison is a stone cold lock as a starter for the full year? I don't think we are. I'm inclined to believe he is the starter, but until we see it for a full season, guys have gotten benched before. Roschon Johnson, who, by the way, looked pretty good for the Bears over the weekend in their preseason game against the Colts, plays in a crowded backfield for the Bears. So it would take multiple guys not being that good or getting injured. But I thought Roschon Johnson was awesome as a player in college. As a matter of fact, he averaged 3.97 yards after contact, which was actually the best in the Big 12. Number 2, Bijan Robinson, his teammate and the guy who he actually backed up in college at 3.90. If Roschon Johnson had not gone to Texas and instead had gone to a school that did not have an 8th overall pick running back, I think he would have been maybe 2nd round pick, maybe even a 3rd round pick, a guy that we'd be talking about in a different light. Last one is Evan Hall, and 5th round pick out of Northwestern, who's been playing a decent amount so far this preseason. All I would say is that until Jonathan Taylor returns, we obviously have to imagine the possibilities of who could be the starting running back for the Colts. I'm not sure this offense is going to lend itself to a big running back output if it's not Jonathan Taylor. But the competition right now, we're talking about Kenyon Drake and Deion Jackson and Jason Huntley,
is
right?
Zach Moss going to be in that category once he comes back from injuries?
Yeah, but obviously being banged up right now.
But none of those names give you any sort of fear whatsoever. You obviously want Jonathan Taylor to be there, but if he's not, give me the young kid that I'd rather see than these guys that we haven't seen it from.
Yeah, it's just names that, again, it's names that are in situations where I'm not certain that current starter is going to be the starter for the full year, and that's what you're looking for from a running back sleeper. Because I'll just give an example here, right? There are other spots where if you told me that, this is just an example here, right? Like, if you told me that Devin Singletary was your favorite running back sleeper, I'm not disagreeing with the idea that Devin Singletary is a pretty good player, but it would mean that like something pretty significant happens to Dameon Pierce. It would mean that Dameon Pierce is not the guy that we think he is, right? Like, we have a season of Dameon Pierce being a legit starter. I'm in big, by the way, on Dameon Pierce this season.
Yeah, we'll talk about him a little later.
We just haven't seen other guys in those situations that I mentioned star yet, and that to me is the reason why I have these as potential sleepers.
So I think this one is still interesting. We talked about this a little bit last week. All right, I want to ask you about Alexander Mattison.
Okay.
Because, again, every single time, right, I'm listening to fantasy podcasts, I'm watching fantasy shows, Dalvin Cook goes down. Guys, Alexander Mattison is a top 10 running back this week with Dalvin Cook being out. The idea that this potentially is, he's not listed higher either in our rankings or there's at least question marks. Is there more reason for that than we just haven't seen it over a full season? Is there a reason, like, have the Vikings given any indication that they don't trust Alexander Mattison? Or is this just hey, similar to Tony Pollard, but not exactly Tony Pollard, until you've seen it for a full season, there's always going to be some question marks as to how someone can do it over the consistency of 18 weeks.
Yeah, so and we brought this up, I think it was last Thursday or Friday, in the similar context of Alexander Mattison, but it's just sort of bears repeating. When you say, like, if something happens to Dalvin Cook in, like, week 6, he would have been a top 10 running back. I noted that, like, before the season, we feel good about a lot of running backs. That number will shrivel pretty quickly once the season begins because guys just won't perform, or they'll get hurt, or any number of factors can contribute to players' value going down as opposed to players going up, players' value going up. So it's a fair question. I'm not out on the current starters in those situations right now. It's more that, like, you're looking for a sleeper. Like, we've talked about every name already, right? Like, the pathway to being a sleeper is, it's like something happening that is currently unforeseen. And like I said, I don't think Dameon Pierce is going to get benched. I don't think Ramondre Stevenson's going to get benched. I don't think that Travis Etienne's going to get benched, right? I think, though, that it's because we haven't seen it from Alexander Mattison, the chance that Ty Chandler takes over is larger than the chance that a guy in a different backfield takes over, where the starter is just way more entrenched.
Okay. All right, let's move ahead and talk about some rookie wide receivers here. These guys seem like late season potential breakout options for you, Field. That's always kind of what we're looking for, right? With these rookie wide receivers, not early season production, but later season production. You have been in on Jordan Addison, I feel like, all offseason. I'm just going to give you the floor. Talk about why you like the kid.
Yeah, so I think that Addison has the most clear path to production amongst the first 4 picks of the first wide receivers that were drafted. They were taken in succession, 20, 21, 22, 23. And I'm in on Jordan Addison. I think the player is really talented. The opportunity to take over the Adam Thielen vacated target role, to me, is pretty enticing. Thielen had 109 targets last year. That was 31st in the NFL. So this was also a very pass-heavy offense. 73% of Minnesota's yards came through the passing game last season. That was the 4th highest mark in the NFL. They want to run it. Now, part of that was because they were constantly in shootouts last year. Have you seen their secondary recently?
I have not.
No one has. It doesn't exist. They have a terrible secondary. Like, I expect them to be in a very, very similar situation this year where they are constantly playing high-scoring games. I'm in on Jordan Addison. Sounds like the biggest detractors don't like some of the physical profiles. Mike mentioned he was a light player, like body weight-wise, who didn't run like a 4.25 or something, but I think he's like a route-running savant. Expected back from the concussion protocol maybe as soon as today, but to me, like a player that has star potential in this Minnesota Vikings offense, and it could be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, coming off the board right now in the 12th round. So that's pretty late. I mean, you're getting really good value there if he turns into any of the things that you're talking about. 12th round is not somewhere spot where you're drafting someone to be a potential starter, but you can get a lot of value there. Also, Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, first round pick. And these guys kind of check some of the same boxes. The big thing with Johnston that we don't have with Addison is that, like, he's wide receiver 3 on his team, at least to begin the year. You've got Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. This was a pick that I think was about helping the team in 3 wide receiver sets, but it's also about looking towards the future. I don't think that Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, especially Allen, are guarantees to be back next year, right? Like, we could reach the inflection point for those 2 guys. I mention that only because we could be talking about Quentin Johnston as like a potential top 20 wide receiver going into next season, even if he doesn't have a monster rookie season. But great quarterback, great offense, new system, and a guy who did a lot of his damage after the catch. Like, he doesn't need to haul in some of those high variance throws down the field. He could turn the 15-yard throw and do a 50-yard play, could Quentin Johnston. So I'm in on him as a late-round target.
You know what's crazy?
What's that?
About this offense is the fact that, and I realize he's just the odd man out now, but Josh Palmer still caught 72 balls last year.
Yeah.
Like, as a wide receiver 4 in this offense, I realize that there's not a lot that I'm excited about him this year for fantasy. Someone would have to get hurt.
Yeah.
But, like, they just have so many good pass catchers in that room. The idea that we haven't even seen Quentin Johnston and we're more excited about him than Josh Palmer, there's a lot of upside in this potential offense.
That's pretty natural, though, right? Like,
it is.
A first-round pick being more exciting than a third-round pick.
If we saw Palmer take a bigger step last year when both...
They probably would have taken Johnson then.
Exactly.
They would have probably passed and taken another position that would have helped this roster more.
But these guys, when you're talking about guys like this, right, you're looking at the situation like Christian Watson from last year, a rookie wide receiver that breaks out down towards the stretch near the fantasy playoffs, or a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown the year before.
Yeah.
These rookie wide receivers that put it together towards the back half of their rookie year, and they start, gaining a little bit of buzz because you're excited about Amon-Ra, maybe not quite as much because these were first rounders, but still.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think these guys, like, in the case of Johnston, I would be surprised if it happens right out of the gates. None of these guys are a guarantee. That's why we're talking about them in the sleeper portion of the show.
Exactly.
And maybe it takes a little bit of time for Jordan Addison, but if I had to kind of cast my die on one rookie wide receiver who I expect to have a significant role right away, it's Johnston. I think Zay Flowers is probably like nipping on his heels a little bit. I also like Zay Flowers, by the way. But I think it's Addison. I may have just screwed that up a minute ago.
That's okay.
I think Addison has the most likely early role. I think that Zay Flowers could be right there as well. I think Johnston's going to take some time, but by the middle of the season, if he's wide receiver 2 in this offense, there could be a ton of value there.
Absolutely. All right, speaking of wide receiver 2's field.
Yeah.
A lot of camp buzz around a handful of players that we have been excited about. One of them being Elijah Moore, moving from the Jets now to Cleveland. We've been waiting to see what this Browns offense is going to look like with a hopefully reinvigorated Deshaun Watson on the field, because last year while he was under center, they did not look fantastic. But you're taking a shot on a second wide receiver from this Browns offense. Elijah Moore seems to be the guy.
So they cannot stop talking about him in Cleveland.
They won't.
And we've seen a ton of highlights. We have seen a ton of rhetoric from their head coach, Kevin Stefanski. I think Deshaun Watson's been very vocal in his praise for Elijah Moore, and they need a second receiver, right? They have DPJ, who is a good vertical threat, Donovan Peoples-Jones, but besides Amari Cooper, that second wide receiver spot was a position of need this offseason, and he's good. Like, Moore's a good player. He was buried last year. I'll tell you about just how buried he was in a second. But remember, as a rookie in 2021, he looked like the real deal, playing for a Jets offense that obviously wasn't very good. But I think there's a quarterback upgrade, obviously, compared to where things were last year. And we know that things were not great between Moore and the franchise. That's part of the reason why they were willing to trade a player they just took in the second round 2 years ago. But get this. Elijah Moore was targeted on 13% of his routes last season. He ran over 400 routes last year. There were 62 players to run at least 400 routes. Elijah Moore was dead last in terms of target percentage. They just didn't use him at all.
I wouldn't be happy either if I was Elijah Moore then.
So he was dead last out of 62 players to run at least 400 routes last year. Like, I think that what the Jets couldn't get out of Elijah Moore, the Browns can. Now, there are some mitigating factors. Not going to have a ton of touchdown upside, and this is more of a volume play than this is a big play threat type of guy. But would not surprise me if at the end of this season, Elijah Moore's got 90 catches, and we're all like, oh, yeah, I remember that guy that we all loved for the Jets 2 years ago.
Christian Kirk. Is he this year's Christian Kirk?
That's possible. Yeah. I mean,
maybe not, as because he's got Amari Cooper there. Christian Kirk didn't have someone,
but
I
like that idea.
It's not a terrible idea. By the way, wide receiver 55, Elijah Moore right now, coming off the board. And how many rounds are there in fantasy? 16 rounds in a fantasy draft?
16 typically, yeah.
So he's coming off the board at the end of the 15th, so he's free.
Pretty much all these guys are. These guys are all
guys that if you
round 10 and beyond. So a lot of these guys have very, very little downside in terms of opportunity cost.
I want to ask you about Zay Jones, too. Another guy. I kind of feel like Zay Jones has sort of been left out of this list that we've been talking about, right, when we're looking at players. Looking at wide receivers, 3 wide receiver sets last year, the Jaguars ran 705 plays in 3 wide receiver sets. That was just like right in the middle, 15th in the NFL. But he was really good last year with Christian Kirk. Is there a chance that maybe we're overlooking Zay Jones and that there's a chance that this offense could support 3 wide receivers, not on a weekly basis, but you can have some spike weeks where Zay Jones could still be usable here.
Yeah, so this is actually less about the possibility of this offense supporting 3 wide receivers weekly and more about the idea that we think it's Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk as the top 2 receivers.
We do.
Zay Jones is a good football player. What if he is a top 2 wideout for them? And by the way, there were times earlier this preseason when there were starters on the field for the Jaguars, and in those 2 receiver sets, Calvin Ridley, Zay Jones. So you're getting him for free, and he could. And I don't think that there's any scenario in which one of Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley, or Zay Jones is totally buried, and they become like 20% playtime players. But if Zay Jones ends up as the second leading target getter amongst Jaguars wide receivers this season, and you're getting him for free, that to me would be a massive steal. And we've just, all off season, we've been talking about Calvin Ridley 1, Christian Kirk 2. Zay Jones is a very serviceable football player. He was great for the Raiders back in 2021, turned that into a legitimate contract with the Jaguars in 2022, and played awesome last year. He had over 80 catches and 823 receiving yards. So he was 21st in targets last year. Maybe Christian Kirk renders him entirely moot. I'm sorry, Calvin Ridley renders him entirely moot. I would just be surprised by that. Along those lines, I mean, if there was ever a time where his value was at its lowest after a really good season, right now is that time.
That seems crazy to me, and maybe you can talk me out of this. But like one of the things we talk about all the time is follow the money, follow the money, follow the money. Like they paid Christian Kirk real money to be a huge part of this offense. For him to not, like, part of my thought process is, do we just roll 3 wide receiver sets and we see a little less Evan Engram than we did last year?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you're going to see those 4 guys on the field a lot.
Yeah,
together.
it's going to be those
lot,
4.
A lot. Yep. And that's a great starting 4, by the way, amongst pass catchers. Like they have one of the best supporting casts in the entire NFL.
There was a first-round wide receiver last year that we liked in little snippets named Jahan Dotson. This year he's going to get Sam Howell thrown the football field. It's another one of those guys that, just like everyone else, I've been excited about that potential maturation process. But with Sam Howell, there's a little bit more of a question mark. Obviously, though, potential sleeper here with the skill set that he brings to the table.
Yeah, so he's obviously going later in drafts is Jahan Dotson. He is a total stud, though, as a player, and this is a fairly crazy nugget. If you look at all the players in the NFL with at least 25 catches, I get it, that's a low bar to clear. But of the players with at least 25 catches last season, Jahan Dotson had the most fantasy points per reception. That was 3.75. It's the 6th highest by any rookie over the past 5 seasons. Now, the efficiency was in part off the charts because he kept scoring touchdowns, but 16th pick in the draft last year. If this offense is just competent, Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson can survive. I know that Curtis Samuel is a really unique player who was very useful for the Commanders at times last season. I kind of feel like the days of us wondering whether this is a 3 wide receiver approach are a little bit behind us. Like, I'm bullish on Jahan Dotson. Obviously, we're all bullish on Terry McLaurin going into this season. So I think Dotson deserves some recognition as a low-end wide receiver 4 that could pay off in a significant way.
I tried so hard. I wanted Samuel to be like a legitimate option last year, and it felt like it happened. The weeks that I wanted it to happen was never the weeks that it happened, and the weeks that it did happen was the weeks that I wasn't starting him in my fantasy roster.
He's a pretty unique player. I think that's in some ways, though, been one of the defining stories of his career, right? Like he's had pockets where he was awesome, and then pockets where he goes completely radio silent, and for a fantasy manager, you rarely know when those actually take place.
I feel it's impossible not to look at this list and just see a bunch of youth on here. I also really quickly want to talk about Romeo Dobbs.
Okay, go for it.
I feel the same. It's not as much as Elijah Moore, but I am still on the Romeo Dobbs bandwagon over Christian Watson. I feel like there's been still a ton of camp buzz. He has been fantastic when he has been used by Jordan Love. He has 4 catches throughout the preseason. Those 4 catches, one was a touchdown, 3 were first downs. Give me the guy that is going to be that short-range target that also, again, it's free. This kind of feels like, I know I've been arguing with Mike Clay about this. What was that running back that Matthew and Mike used to argue about all the time, that Matthew was like, no, I'm just saying, like, he costs you nothing, and I like him a lot. And Mike was like, Kalen Ballage. Maybe he's like Kalen Ballage, where it's like he costs you nothing. He's free at the end of drafts. I'm not even saying you need to draft Romeo Dobbs. but I like him with what the Packers are doing with him here in this offense for Jordan Love as a potential short-range target. I'm just going to keep saying that.
Interesting. I might like Jaden Reed more amongst the Packers wide receivers.
You could
not
talk
named
me into
Christian
Jaden
Watson.
Reed.
Okay, but these are sleepers. These are lottery tickets.
Yep. All right. Can you have sleepers at the tight end position?
Sure,
too?
you can. Yeah, I mean, and I'll be quick here because we've talked about at least two of these players quite a bit. Hunter Henry for the Patriots. I know Mike Gesicki is still on the mend right now from what's a shoulder injury. Henry's had one of the best training camps amongst all the Patriots pass catchers. Had some solid touchdown upside in the past. Luke Musgrave is really interesting here. He's played every snap with Jordan Love on the field so far this preseason. They did draft 2 tight ends in the top 3 rounds, Musgrave in the 2nd round, and then in the 3rd round, Tucker Kraft from South Dakota State. But Musgrave looks the part, man. Great athlete who has been the buzz of Packers training camp. And then Dalton Kincaid, I've been talking about this since the beginning of the podcast season. Awesome athlete, very, very good offense. Could he be the Bills' 2nd or 3rd pass catcher? I know that Bills' 2nd or 3rd pass catchers have not always paid off in prior seasons, but
we've been trying to make that a thing.
We have been, but you're getting for free, right? And
Again,
if I'm looking for a sleeper tight end, especially for a rookie tight end, which we know do not have a great history, I'm looking for premium athletes with the chance for a whole bunch of touchdowns. And in the case of Dalton Kincaid, that's certainly the case because the Bills' offense is just that good.
I agree. I love Dalton Kincaid this year. And here's one of the weird things about it.
Okay.
I don't like rookie tight ends. I don't want to draft rookie tight ends in fantasy.
Does, right?
But this is a situation where, again, there's just been a lot of camp buzz from that tight end position if you want to wait at that position or just grab a second guy, just wait altogether. If I'm grabbing like a Pat Freiermuth or someone later on and I want to grab someone like Dalton Kincaid to double up on the position, see which one shakes it out, like I really like that spot this year.
Yeah. Freiermuth I would consider just like I might have to be a little bit further down than like the Freiermuth tier before I start to invest in a second tight end, but there are crazier thoughts than doubling up with a guy in Dalton Kincaid who has that much talent.
Seems like there's a lot of upside. All right, Field, we're going to be back and talk about some busts and breakouts in a second. But first, tell us about our friends at Geico.
Geico asks, how would you love a chance to save some money on insurance?
I would love it.
Of course you would. And when it comes to great rates on insurance, Geico can help, like with insurance for your car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and RV. Even help with homeowners or renters coverage. Plus, add an easy-to-use mobile app, available 24-hour roadside assistance, and more. And Geico is an easy choice. Switch today and see all the ways you could save. It's easy. Simply go to geico.com or contact your local agent today.
Football is back. Catch every pass, every tackle, and every heart-pounding play live and in person thanks to our go-to ticket source, Vivid Seats. Vivid Seats delivers great deals on great seats, and they have your back with their 100% buyer guarantee. Vivid Seats, the official ticketing partner of ESPN, is offering you $20 off your first $200 ticket purchase with code FFF. That's code FFF. Download the app or visit vividseats.com today. Vivid Seats. Experience it live. All right, Field Jace, let's talk about some busts here. I never like talking about busts because I don't want to be the negative guy in the show. But every year there are guys that sort of maybe don't live up to expectations. You're trying to like look ahead to be like, what are some situations where, all right, maybe I got some not great feelings about this. Doesn't pass the vibe check.
So let's talk about the concept of a bust.
Yes.
You are being asked to find a player that you have ranked very high that you also think might not be very good.
You know, that sucks, doesn't it?
Well, no, it's
just not fun.
It's sort of counterintuitive, right?
A little bit.
Okay, so you have this guy really highly
that's why
ranked.
I have him ranked there.
But you don't think he's going to be very good this year. Why would you have him ranked very high if you think he's going to be bad?
Groupthink.
Right. Well, that's why you have him ranked high, you're saying?
Yeah, I'm just saying, like across the industry, I think a lot of times groupthink is a part of that conversation.
No, I mean, I think I think groupthink definitely does contribute to players being ranked where they are. But I would say more than anything, Daniel, I think it's matter that the term sleepers, bust, and breakouts are as trendy and juicy of topics as we have in fantasy football coverage. So obviously people are going to be asking, who are your busts for this season? So I'm going to try to lay out the case for why I have players ranked as starters at their position that I also think might have a lesser margin for error than players ranked similar to them.
You know, it's not crazy. This first one we're going to talk about, I don't think it's even that difficult. I can see both the range of outcomes here on Deshaun Watson this year, Field Yates. I could see him being a top 5 quarterback. I could also see those struggles continuing like we saw last year.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about Deshaun Watson a season ago, who is my pick for a quarterback bust, even though I have him as quarterback 9.
Okay.
Last year, upon his return, and that was obviously after an 11-game suspension, plus a full season being away. He averaged 14.3 fantasy points per game. That was 18th amongst quarterbacks. The quarterback just ahead of him was Mac Jones, who, think about Mac Jones and that disaster of an offense last season, still was better than Watson in the final 5 games. There were 31 quarterbacks that qualified for total QBR for the weeks that Deshaun Watson played. There was only 2 quarterbacks that had a lower QBR than Deshaun Watson upon that return. Mike White and Baker Mayfield. He averaged 6.5 yards per attempt last season. That was dead last amongst quarterbacks. That was 36th amongst quarterbacks with at least 100 passes last year.
Worse than dead. Dead last is 32nd.
Yeah, I don't even. Yeah, well, there might be more than 100 passes last year. But the point is that Deshaun Watson played horribly upon his return last season. Obviously, there are 2 sample sizes of Deshaun Watson's career. Prior to playing with the Browns, when he had a quarterback 1 season on a points per game basis with the Houston Texans, and there's the Cleveland Browns sample. The Cleveland Browns sample is extremely disconcerting. The Texans example and sample size is very encouraging. That's why I have him as quarterback 9, but make no mistake about it. If you're looking for like safety and support, you ask me what I think is more likely. Deshaun Watson having a below average fantasy season or Kirk Cousins, who I have ranked lower than Deshaun Watson, and the answer is Watson. I think Kirk Cousins' floor is higher than Deshaun Watson's floor. That's the evaluation you have to make when you're debating whether or not to leave your draft with Deshaun Watson as your starting quarterback.
When you say that and we're talking about where this might fall apart, are you thinking about this offense might not work because we're not going to see Deshaun get like back to using his legs the way that we saw prime Deshaun do? Do you think that there's passing game like usage that this is going to be a problem here? Or is it just like in general, you think this Browns offense isn't going to flow the way that we're expecting with a guy that could be a top 5 quarterback?
I would say this is that like last year he did run a decent, I'll pull the exact number. It was 36 rushing attempts last season for Deshaun Watson.
And he
upon
had 6
returning.
games last year?
That was 6. So 36, he averaged 4.9 yards per carry, which that's fairly close in his last 2 seasons with the Texans, 5.0 and 4.9 yards per carry. So the rushing part was fine. It's that the passing took a massive dip. Remember in Houston, he was the yards per attempt god, 8.3, 8.2, 7.8, 8.9 during his 4 seasons with the Texans playing. 6.5. I mentioned that number just a minute ago. Like it was dink and dump. There is lots of talk about this Browns offense trying to look more like what it was in Houston. But for a player who completed 58% of his passes with a 6.5 yards per attempt, the question remains right now, can Watson get back to being an elite thrower? If not, he's going to bust.
All right, I'm going to move ahead. I had a player here, but we don't need to talk about him if that's all right. He's a little farther on this list. We got a bunch of guys we got to get to. I'm going to talk about J.K. Dobbins Field. J.K. Dobbins is such a hard one for me from a bust perspective.
Why?
Because I don't want to say it, but I really feel it pretty hard in my heart.
Okay. Like I don't think that's not too crazy to me. Make the case.
So J.K. Dobbins has missed more games in his NFL career than he's played.
Okay.
Right? Currently unhappy with his contract situation, which is a really tough thing when you've missed more games in your career than you have played.
And you want a new deal. That's typically not how it works.
It doesn't work out super great that way. All right, we know that he has been uber elite when he has been healthy and on the field. 5.9 yards per carry since entering the league. 5.9. Almost 6 yards. That's like a college stat. But it's just like there is no more positivity for me after that. He doesn't catch passes. He doesn't score 20. He scored 20 fantasy points twice in his entire career. He's never had 20 touches in a game, and 20 touches as a running back is sort of like that prime number. If you can get to that point, you feel like he's going to be one of those guys.
Sure.
I'm just out on J.K. Dobbins with the no pass catching, with the inability to stay healthy, and the thoughts that maybe Lamar Jackson and this Ravens offense are going to be a little different than we saw last year or the year before. Like, I'm not in on it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think I have a lot of the same points that you are making. I will point to the passing game utilization, though, most specifically. Since Lamar Jackson became a starting quarterback. The most catches by a running back over a full season from the Ravens. Mark Ingram with 26 back in 2019. 26 over the course of a full season. That's like a quarter of McCaffrey or Austin Eckler.
Seriously.
So in order for, let's assume that remains the case, because as we have talked about a million times this year, running quarterbacks are much less inclined to throw.
Don't dump off
to the running backs. And then the statues.
Then the Kirk Cousins and the Matthew Staffords and those guys.
Right? Those guys chuck the ball to the running backs a lot. I don't think that's going to change for J.K. Dobbins this year. I'd be surprised if that number pushed 45 or 50 receptions beyond the injury concerns, beyond the crowded backfield concerns, which now includes not just Gus Edwards, but also Melvin Gordon, who's got a real chance to make this roster. I mean, he signed a real deal with them this offseason. So, yeah, I also have J.K. Dobbins as my running back bust.
Not in on that this year. All right, let's talk about some wide receivers here, Field. We mentioned when DeAndre Hopkins signed with the Tennessee Titans.
Yep.
He's going to be the obvious wide receiver one there. Not my favorite offense for him to go to, Field, because of what they potentially. I mean, they're just such a run-heavy team. You have him here on the potential bust list. Why do you have that?
Yeah, so I think that what's really important to note is that most of the players that we see bust in recent years have either been guys that we have never seen it before and we just get too excited about them.
Yep.
Good example from last year, if you consider him a bust, would be Gabe Davis, right? Make him a top 20 wide receiver going into the season. On paper, he checks a lot of boxes, but we had never seen it before from a guy who was a 4th round pick. Mm-hmm. Other side of it, so I'm mentioning that did not see it before and a 4th round pick thing because like when you fall to like pick 113, the NFL is telling you it's not a guarantee this player is going to become a star, right? Obviously, we've never seen it before with Bijan Robinson, but Bijan was the 8th overall pick, and a lot of teams had him as one of the 5 best players on their boards. It's just he plays running back, right? So it's a different category, Bijan vis-a-vis Gabe Davis going into last season. The other case where we often see busts are where guys get caught up with age in a hurry. On the good side of DeAndre Hopkins, last year he was absolutely mashing when he came back. So there were some signs of physical decline. We have seen some signs of physical decline. He has not been exactly the same player in recent years as he was during his apex with the Texans. However, this is an entirely different offense that you just alluded to. This is an offense that is going to run the football as much as anybody not named the Atlanta Falcons.
Yep.
The offense still goes through Derrick Henry. And over the past 5 years, think about some of the great receivers, either in terms of skill or name, the Titans have had. A.J. Brown.
Yep.
They traded for Julio Jones, was supposed to be a big-time player for this offense, right? Robert Woods last year they traded for. And I was optimistic on Robert Woods going into last season. Treylon Burks was a first-round pick last year. Over the past 5 years, they've had just one top 25 wide receiver.
Yikes.
And that offense, I think, is pretty emblematic of what it's going to be this upcoming year. So if you're looking at players, I've got Hopkins right inside my top 20. Not totally out on him, to be clear, to reiterate the theme of this segment. But yes, if you told me at the end of the year that DeAndre Hopkins, who, remember, when he got cut, it was because the Cardinals could not find a trade partner for him. And while he took 2 visits, there was no mention of a visit to go to the Chiefs or the Bills, anybody besides the Titans and the Patriots. The offer he ended up signing was pretty solid, $13 million a year, right? But like, we're not talking about an overwhelming contract for DeAndre Hopkins. The NFL told us a little bit about how they feel about D-Hop. Maybe that's what we'll see this year. Maybe this is the next version of Julio Jones.
Here's what I would love to see.
Okay.
I would love to see DeAndre Hopkins, and because I have all those same fears that you've alluded to. Nobody saw more stacked boxes last year than Derrick Henry.
Not going to change.
So if you have a guy like DeAndre Hopkins and they're putting 8 men plus in the box, like Ryan Tannehill, please just do what we're all asking. Please just force feed the ball to what I would assume to D-Hop. Yeah.
Well, I think the Titans would say, why? Derrick Henry gets stacked boxes and then runs for 1,500 yards a season, right?
Have they won any Super Bowls during that?
No, come on. You sound like a Twitter reply guy right
do
now,
right
right?
now,
Where
yeah.
it's like, you know, I'll post a highlight of like, or whatever, like, you know, you post a stat or a highlight, or I made a comment about somebody recently. It was like, I wonder if I can pull it up from my recent tweets. So if I can get TweetDeck open. Does TweetDeck still exist?
It exists, but maybe not in the same way that you knew it feels.
Yeah, I had some like very innocuous tweet, right? It was something about like an awesome player who like, man, I can't think of it right now. But it was like, I don't know, Deebo Samuel or Amon-Ra. It was Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? And it was like, you know, Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to miss, you know, a couple days of practice, expected back. And somebody was like, never won a Super Bowl. He stinks.
Okay,
I'm like, okay, great. Like, thank you for your insight right there. I'm glad to know that Amon-Ra St. Brown, 2 years into his career, has not won a Super Bowl, so he stinks, right? Like,
Titans last year had two wide receivers, had two 100-yard games from wide receivers. All I'm saying is
of course.
they're in a spot where they could, like DeAndre Hopkins could come in and totally smash. I just don't know I have him as wide receiver 19 as well, but those fears exist for me because of everything, the situation that you laid out here.
Yeah, no doubt. And so, and by the way, while the Titans have not won the Super Bowl, they've been the number one seed in the AFC at least once over the past few years, and that was when they were running the football a ton with both Derrick Henry and Deontay Foreman.
Yep. All right. I'm going to really quickly talk about Deebo Samuel. He's another wide receiver that I have as a potential bust this year.
That's a spicy one. I like it.
It really is. All right, so here's the thing. We're looking at Deebo Samuel. Obviously, 2021 Deebo was fantastic. He had 10 targets a game over his first 8 games. Then over his final 8 games, totally different player, took a huge rushing load.
Yep.
I did not see the same thing in 2022, and I am nervous that he is not going to get back to being that same player in 2021 because a guy named Christian McCaffrey is now in the backfield. I don't see Deebo Samuel running the ball. That rushing value just cratered once CMC got there. Only 96 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns once Christian McCaffrey joined this team. He was only seeing 7 targets a game once CMC got here. For a guy that's being drafted as a top 15 wide receiver, knowing that so much of his value was coming from his legs, 7 targets isn't quite enough for me. So I am out on Deebo this year because of all the different pieces that they have in this offense and the question mark that they have in Brock Purdy under center. I have him closer to like wide receiver 23, I think, than a top 15 guy.
I will take all your Deebo shares instead. They're
That's
all mine.
fair.
I'll have every single one of them.
Yep.
I don't think there's as many question marks about Brock Purdy as apparently you do. I think Brock Purdy is going to be that starting quarterback. And
yeah, he's going to be fine. And he's going to throw 15 touchdowns, and that's great. Like 15 touchdowns.
Just like Jimmy Garoppolo used to do when Deebo Samuel was wide receiver 1 for a full season.
He did that one time.
Counting on the 49ers getting the most out of Deebo after a year that I think both sides would admit last year Deebo was not himself, and the 49ers did not do enough to get out of Deebo Samuel. I think this is a reset year for Deebo Samuel. I am optimistic on Deebo this year. We already have a board bet.
We already have a board bet. We can keep moving on from this. All right, let's talk about Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz last year field. Everyone loved Dalton Schultz in Dallas, catching passes from Dak Prescott. Now he moves on to Houston, potential safety blanket for C.J. Stroud. Doesn't have the same warm and fuzzies that we had last year.
That would be accurate. And we talk about chemistry between players a lot. We, guys posting, pictures on Instagram with each other and stuff like that, or spending off-season workouts in Florida when it's, a million degrees out. But look, they're grinding all their life to get this work done. But the chemistry between Dak Prescott and Dalton Schultz was real. A lot of the chemistry is just like social media creation. Over the past 3 regular seasons, with Dak Prescott under center, Dalton Schultz, 6.3 targets per game, 47.9 receiving yards per game, and 12.1 fantasy points per game. He scored a ton of touchdowns with Dak.
That's great as a tight
Off
end.
the field, 4.7 targets per game, 27.9 yards per game, and just 6.7 fantasy points per game. Couple that with an offense that
You said off the field. You mean
when Dak was not available.
Not when Dak was off the field. Okay,
Dak was, hurt with Cooper Rush time and stuff like that.
Okay.
This offense is going to get there one day with C.J. Stroud. He has shown some pretty unique stuff so far this season. He's also looked like a rookie, which, by the way, that's no fault of his. That tends to be what happens when you are literally a rookie. I am a C.J. Stroud believer. It's going to take some time.
Super tough franchise as well. Like you're coming into the number 2 overall pick as the rookie quarterback on a team that is pretty devoid of talent. Like it's going to take a minute.
Like it's going to get there. And I'm actually I like the foundation of the offensive line. They're starting to put together some pieces around CJ Stroud, but it's going to take some time. And I think as a result of that, somebody like Dalton Schultz is going to not benefit from this change of scenery. So Schultz would be my tight end bust. I like the player a lot. This one hurts me. I was like a Dalton Schultz advocate for a while. So Schultz is a solid NFL player.
Yes.
I'm just not so sure that this offense is going to lend itself to a big year for him.
That's fair. I think that's fair if you want to talk about it from that perspective. Maybe Dalton Schultz is the better conversation around if you're going to grab a second tight end, someone like Dalton Kincaid. Maybe that's the kind of guy that you
do
pair
a double
with.
Dalton.
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
Ooh.
Double Dalton, baby. Let's do it.
I'm not against that. All right, let's talk about a couple of breakouts here. We got 10 minutes left.
This is where we get the vibes back up. Dude. Let's do this.
Breakouts, I'll tell you what, I just wrote youth, everywhere on this list. Breakouts are just about youth. Let's start at the quarterback position.
Let's start there.
Pretty easy, huh?
From week 9 on last year, this player was the 5th highest scoring quarterback, trailing only Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Justin Fields. Over that span, he had 15 passing touchdowns to 2 interceptions while averaging over 250 passing yards per game. Can you guess this player?
Jared Goff.
Close. Trevor Lawrence.
Trevor
Lawrence
Lawrence.
was awesome down the stretch last year, and like this is so like obvious and logical, right? The guy who was billed as the best quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck.
Yep.
Gets a Super Bowl winning head coach.
Yep.
Good pieces around him. Competent offensive system. Comes into his own. Like, this is what we expect. Like, it may not be long, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but like, it shouldn't surprise us if Trevor Lawrence is, when we're doing like Madden ratings and that top 10 players by position list that Jeremy Fowler does every year.
Oh, yeah.
Like that, there's like that 2-week span in the summer where people just get big mad online because their favorite team's favorite player doesn't make Jeremy Fowler's list, which Jeremy does not make himself. He asks people in the NFL to decide who the best linebackers are. So, like, when your team's favorite linebacker isn't mentioned, you're yelling at Jeremy Fowler, which is such a silly thing to do. He is not deciding these top 10 linebackers. Yell at the scouts and the coaches and the GMs instead. I don't know how you can do that, but just go yell at them. Anyways, I digress. Trevor Lawrence will be a fixture amongst top 5 or 8 quarterback lists sooner than later.
Yes.
I'm all in on Trevor Lawrence, and I love him at cost, right? You're getting him in the 8th round right now, a massive, massive value.
One of the best values, I think, in fantasy right now at the quarterback position is Trevor Lawrence this year. All right, let's talk about the running back position. I love a bunch of these guys. You got Jahmyr Gibbs on here. You got Tony Pollard on here.
All in? Yep.
I'll quickly, about Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard finally is free of Zeke. Last year, he was running back 21 in touches. Do you know how efficient he was in spite of the fact that he was running back 21 in touches field? He was top 12 in rushing yards. He had 12 total touchdowns, top 10 in fantasy points. I don't expect the efficiency to continue the same way that we did last year.
Yeah.
But because of that increased volume, Tony Pollard to the moon? Is that a fair thing to say this year?
To the moon. He actually led all running backs in yards per touch last season. He averaged 9.5 yards per catch. This is a college wide receiver.
9.5 yards.
And how about this? You mentioned efficiency. That is, without a doubt, the word that best describes Tony Pollard. Third in running backs in terms of yards per rush, not touch, last season at 5.2. And this is a wild stat that Harrison, our researcher for the day, pulled up. Since 2000, there have been 333 individual seasons in which a player had at least 1,000 rushing yards.
Okay.
Tony Pollard had a rush rate, which is percentage of teams carry, of just 36.3% last year. That was 331st out of the 333 seasons with at least 1,000 yards last year. Like, this guy did the most with the least. Huge opportunity. There's no clear-cut backup. I think it's Deuce Vaughn, but who's been awesome in the preseason, by the way. He's on my short list for preseason MVP. I don't think Deuce Vaughn's a real threat to take significant work away from Tony Pollard.
Nope.
Great pass-catching back. Offensive line that got its best player back in Zach Martin recently.
Also,
they should be able to generate some push for him.
It's August 21st, Field, and we haven't signed.
That's right.
We haven't signed another running back to this backfield.
So Ronald Jones will miss the first 2 games if he even stays on this roster going forward. So yeah, clear path to Tony Pollard being an elite. Like, he could be, even despite the fact that he was a top 10 running back last season, he could be one of the guys that is one of the biggest step forward players in all of fantasy. He's a breakout player for me. Jahmyr Gibbs also on that list. We want running backs that can catch the football. Over the past 2 seasons, no running back in FBS had more receiving yards than Jahmyr Gibbs. 914 receiving yards over the past 2 seasons. I'm going to reiterate something we talked about last week. Fantasy football, maybe your league has some sort of nominal award for like places 4th through 8th, right? Like, you get a ribbon if you finish in 4th place. Like, maybe you get like a meal voucher at the ESPN cafeteria if you finish in 6th place. Most leagues, you don't get anything for finishing 4th. You want players that can, scrape the moon in terms of their upside. And that is where Jahmyr Gibbs is, because if the Lions utilize him, as you would expect a team, that right now, I'll quiz you. You're the biggest Lions fan I know. Number one wide receiver on this offense is?
Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Okay. Number 2 is fill in the blank.
Marvin Jones or Josh Reynolds?
No, sorry, I should rephrase that. Number 2 pass catcher. Is it still Marvin Jones or Josh Reynolds?
At that point, no. It's honestly, like, I'd rather have probably Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he's going to be
What if it is Jahmyr Gibbs? Like, what if Jahmyr Gibbs is 2nd or 3rd?
Right now, without Jameson Williams
catches?
missing the first 6 games of the season, and there's not a bunch of guys behind him. They've been talking about how they want to have David Montgomery in the backfield and be able to put Jahmyr Gibbs out wide and use him as the weapon that he is.
Yeah. So what if Jahmyr Gibbs is 2nd or 3rd in targets for a Lions offense that throws the ball plenty and has a brilliant offensive coordinator that should be able to get him the ball in space, which is what he does best? They used the 12th pick in the draft on him.
Yep.
People thought that they overspent to use that 12th pick in the draft on Jahmyr Gibbs. The Lions immediately talked about how this is the one guy in the draft that checks the box that we were looking to check. Alvin Kamara has been the comparison they have not shied away from.
Nope.
When you are drawing Alvin Kamara comparisons, and Kamara had 81 catches as a rookie, that to me has my attention. All in on Jahmyr Gibbs. I'll mention one more because we got time. We don't have a lot of time left. James Cook. I continue to grow more and more excited about James Cook during the preseason. And yes, obviously Josh Allen's going to have a rushing role. And yes, the team did sign Latavius Murray and Damian Harris. But whether because of injury or just like age and effectiveness, it feels like James Cook has continued to shine more and more during the preseason. I am in on James Cook.
I'm with you on that one. I really like James Cook as well. And he's going like quite late as a running back because of the fact that everyone's afraid of this Josh Allen-led offense. So it doesn't cost you a lot to be able to get him low. I want to find this here really quickly. He is going off the board
like 30, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Somewhere in that range. Oh, no. Actually, he's jumped quite a bit.
Okay, there you go.
Running
People
back
also
24 right now.
Okay, so people are more in line with how we feel about James Cook. Can I rip through some receivers now because we're so pressed on time?
Yeah, as long as you skip the one in the middle.
Okay. Garrett Wilson is not the one in the middle. We've talked about him a ton. I'm going to leave that short and sweet. Everybody knows how excited we are about Garrett Wilson.
Yep.
If we got just league average quarterback play last year, if he had literally league average in terms of off-target percentage and target
efficiency, yeah.
If he caught a league average percent of his targets last year, and that's often more reflective of the quarterback play and not the player, he would have had 96 catches, 13 more than he actually did. Touchdown equity should be way up. His teammate, Chris Olave, been talking about him a ton. I'll have more on him later on this week, but he's been the best player at Saints training camp. Huge things ahead for Chris Olave. Christian Watson, we talked about him. You and Mike see him differently. Sorry, but I'm more on the Mike side.
That's okay.
Than your side. George Pickens, who we discussed a little bit last week as well. George Pickens, who, as far as talent is concerned, has so much of it.
Does he even know how to catch the ball with two hands, or can he only do it with one?
Catches it with one. And how about this? Now, again, 50 targets is not a massive qualifier, but of all the players that had at least 50 targets, of the 99 quarterback/receiver duos that had at least 50 targets between them, Kenny Pickett's to George Pickens produced the highest total QBR. Pretty crazy, 97.6. So good things tend to happen when you throw the ball George Pickens' way. This is the last one, and I actually wanted to mention this one pretty specifically. And I know it sounds really, really weird because he was awesome last year. Devontae Smith.
What? He was awesome last year.
What if he gets better?
How?
Devontae Smith, who was incredible. How? Because we see guys take steps all the time.
I know.
He's going into his third year in the NFL. Defenses are obviously going to have to account for not just Jalen Hurts as a thrower and a runner, but obviously A.J. Brown. You can't say we're going to just stop one guy on the Eagles offense and expect them to not expose you. That's just impossible to do. So defenses are never going to be able to fully allocate their attention to Devontae Smith. Really, really slow start last year. I think he had 0 catches in week 1. Was awesome. From week 10 on, he was wide receiver 7, but he was good for most of last season. He led the Eagles in catches. I don't think it's that crazy that Devontae Smith could level up even more. He won the Heisman Trophy. This is the most accomplished college receiver season that we have seen in 25 or 30 years. That's how good he was during that final year at Alabama. I believe it was him and Mac Jones that year that just totally crushed the entire SEC and then eventually won the national championship. I'm in on Devontae Smith taking a leap forward. He's a top 15 wide receiver everywhere you look. It could end up being wide receiver 6 by the end of the season.
It's so crazy looking at these Eagles. They need to get better, Field.
Yep.
This is the reason why I'm not interested in this. I want Mike Clay to have even a better team. But
it's pretty crazy, right?
When you see A.J. Brown standing on one side of the field and then you see photos of Devonta Smith, it's these two guys could not be more different in their physical build, in spite of the fact that they're both unbelievable on the field for the Eagles.
They are fuego. If you don't get that reference, go check the Eagles Instagram account. Very funny stuff there from A.J. Brown and also Devontae Smith and an official who called them fuego.
Fuego. I'm going to just quickly read this just because I think it's really fun, and then we can end the podcast here. Eagles wide receivers to finish the year last year.
Okay.
Week 13, A.J. Brown scored 31.9. Devonta Smith scored 21.2.
Absurd.
They scored 50 points between week 14, 17 points, and 17.4. They both scored over 17 points in the fantasy playoffs. Week 15, 27.1 for A.J. Brown, 17.6 for Devonta Smith. Again, over 17 points. Week 16, 16.3 for A.J. Brown, 31.3 for Devonta Smith. They did not score less than 16 fantasy points from weeks 13 to week 17. Both of them in the same offense in the middle of the fantasy playoffs. This team is so good.
Wait, by the way, that was without Jalen Hurts for part of it too, by the way. That was with their backup quarterback.
You're right.
So the offense is awesome.
So
two
good.
tight end breakouts. We've talked about them a bunch, but Chigo Okonkwo and also Greg Dulcich. We've talked about each of those players enough, but they have my attention this year. We're going to wrap things up, though, Daniel, with honestly one of the coolest things that's happened to us in a while on this podcast. So we mentioned the Veterans League last week, and we said send an email our way. I was wondering if we'd get enough responses to fill like maybe a 10-team league. Right before the podcast that came on, we had 327 people, veterans, reach out and say, we want to play in the Fantasy Focus Veterans League. Honestly, it's like humbling beyond belief because there's no greater honor in our country than serving our country, as you, of course, have served our country so nobly and capably. And the audience support is just off the charts. We'll talk about this again probably tomorrow or the next day, but frankly, we're not sure what to do right now.
Yeah, we're trying to figure it out.
It's a great problem. We are trying to figure out what to do because what we don't want to do is let a bunch of people down. We want to find a way to incorporate as many people that responded as we possibly could.
Agreed.
The reality is we don't have leagues at ESPN or anywhere that have 327 people in them. Next thing you know, you're drafting like me as your backup quarterback, which would not be a good thing for your fantasy football team.
Still might be better than Marcus Mariota.
Hey, take that back. Maybe actually.
Maybe not.
Anyways, the point is this, is that we are working through the various options. We are going to get back to you.
Yeah.
The veterans who incredibly overwhelming support, but just like I was touched this weekend as I didn't have a chance to read every single one of the submissions. But I tell you what, if you want to see something impressive, go check out the inbox right now. There are some remarkable people that are so loyal. We can't appreciate you enough for listening to this silly podcast about fantasy football. So we're going to work on our plans a little bit more.
Yep.
We're going to get back to you. But just like couldn't be more touched by 327 submissions. And I haven't even counted in the past 2 hours.
You know, the hardest part is that it's going to be tough for me to be able to bring home a belt like we have here from Trophy Smack if we have 327 other veterans. I'm worried I'm not going to be the best veteran in this group.
But that's definitely possible. You know, I would say this is I think what we could end up doing is trying to get as many people into multiple leagues here at the podcast.
Hey.
And then maybe we'll do something along the lines of a pick and pool for the veterans. And maybe part of the pick and pool will be those that like the certain number of top 5 or whatever it is, get automatic entry into next year's Veterans League. Because if this weekend is any indication, we're going to have interest every single year going forward.
Yeah.
So just a big thank you to everybody that did make their submissions over the weekend. And we're honored by it. We truly are.
We really are. We really are. And this weekend was just fun all the way around. Between the veterans emails, we got to watch more football field. And you went to 3 country shows in a row?
Yeah, well, one was actually not country last night. Here, locally, Ripe. Love our guys, right? I saw a sign for ska music last night.
Shut up.
Old listeners of the podcast know ska.
Big ska fan.
I didn't know until like 2 years ago. So shout out ska music, shout out Ripe, shout out podcast, shout out concerts, and shout out football because we are now 17 days away from the NFL's first regular season game.
So stinking excited.
Wait.
We are going to be back tomorrow with some more exciting content. It's going to be a ton of fun. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. Don't forget to love each other. We love you. Be kind to yourself. I don't know what we're doing tomorrow. Do you know what we're doing tomorrow?
We're talking hockey on the podcast tomorrow.
Yeah, it's going to be something fun. Maybe we'll dive into some Boston College hockey.
Okay, that works. They're very good. Yeah.
That'll be fun. What's Bucci's thing? It's college hockey. That's right.
College hockey.
College hockey. All right. On behalf of Field, my name is Daniel. We love you guys. Don't forget to love each other. Be kind to yourself. We will see you tomorrow when we come back and talk some puck.
Sweet. Alrighty. College hockey.
Going 5-0.